On this Friday night, the risky military mission inside Canada's care homes. More soldiers contract COVID-19. Concerns about compensation and proper training for troops. Breaking news on the federal wage subsidy. Canada's big three political parties are the newest applicants. Deadly disaster. A plane plummets from the sky and into a neighborhood. Plus, fresh fight for freedom. Why activists fear Beijing's new bombshell spells the end of Hong Kong.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. As provinces slowly reopen across the country, the need for testing and contact tracing will be critical. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced his government will fund provincial efforts to test people for COVID-19 and track the contacts of those who test positive. Federal contact tracers will have the capacity to make thousands of calls a day when provinces ask. Ottawa is also helping to procure swabs and other key testing materials that will be needed.
Taking strong, collaborative action to expand testing and contact tracing is important for both Canadians and businesses to have confidence that we're on the right foot. They need to know that we have a coordinated approach to gradually reopen that is rooted in science, evidence, and the ability to rapidly detect and control any future outbreaks.
Testing is still lagging in many provinces, especially those hit hardest by the virus. Ontario's testing is only at half of its daily capacity, despite a spike in case numbers. Today, that province reported 441 new cases and 28 more deaths, the highest daily increase in 2 weeks. What's more troubling, Ontario hasn't been able to account for the source of exposure for more than 2/3 of reported cases in the past month. Quebec remains the epicenter of Canada's outbreak, and the province has yet to achieve its testing goal. Today, 646 new cases and 65 new deaths were recorded. But Quebec is allowing some cultural activities to restart at the end of the month. Museums, libraries, and drive-in theaters will reopen May 29th. Quebec and Ontario have been getting help from the military for the past month. More than 1,700 troops are assisting in long-term care homes, hit hard by the pandemic. But the number of soldiers getting sick is also climbing, and fast. Soldiers aren't currently getting hazard pay, but as Abigail Bimman reports, that could change.
Most COVID-19 deaths in Canada have happened inside long-term care homes, and there's been a sharp spike in the number of cases acquired by the soldiers who have gone inside. 29 cases Friday, up from 5 last week. The Department of National Defence tells Global News the spike is in part due to a wait for formal confirmation of test results.
The forces must be transparent with the numbers.
Veteran and advocate Sylvain Chartrand has been tracking troops working in long-term care homes.
I've got information that the training was really rushed for the typical soldier, and that's concerning.
DND won't provide details on the 29 people who got sick, but says no one needed hospitalization. Chartrand is calling for soldiers to be protected from health concerns that may arise in the future. And right now, while they're on the front lines, he's pushing for danger pay. He has the support of opposition parties.
I am very confident they're going to reach the right decision on this. Yes, they could do it quicker.
As soon as our troops started to become infected with COVID-19, it was inherent upon the government to put in place the hazard pay and benefits. And so for them not to react and do that now is a failure.
Global News asked the Prime Minister why hazard pay is not yet in place.
These are discussions that are ongoing within the military.
While he wouldn't commit to anything, Friday afternoon, the Chief of the Defence Staff announced he's asked staff to pursue hazard pay for those inside long-term care homes and promised more information soon. The military is now waiting to see if provinces will extend their requests for help. Quebec's agreement lasts until June 12th, Ontario's just until Wednesday. That province tells Global News they're looking at all options. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
A vaccine using technology from Canada and China appears to be showing promising results in humans. A report published today in the Lancet Medical Journal shows some of the participants developed antibodies and T-cell responses against the virus a month after vaccination. 108 adults in Wuhan, China are taking part in the study. They were given a single dose of a weekend common cold virus called adenovirus. Most participants reported fever or fatigue, which is typical for vaccines, but there were no serious side effects. Further trials are needed to confirm if the vaccine will protect people from COVID-19. This is one of about a dozen COVID-19 vaccines in the early stages of testing. As Ottawa rolls out financial aid for Canadians, we're learning tonight some federal parties are getting in on it too. Both the Liberals and Conservatives are receiving the 75% wage subsidy benefit, and the NDP and Greens have applied for it. Political donations have been drying up during the pandemic. The subsidy is aimed at helping businesses keep people on the payroll and rehire laid-off workers. So far, the government has paid out $5.7 billion through the program. We're getting a look at the effect of the pandemic on retail sales in Canada. According to Statistics Canada, retail sales in March fell 10% to $47.1 billion, the biggest plunge on record. Clothing and accessory stores were the hardest hit, with sales dropping more than 51%, and gas station sales plunged more than 19%. It's estimated about 40% of retailers closed their doors during the month. On the other hand, food and beverage stores saw sales jump more than 22%. In the U.S., President Trump has deemed all churches and other houses of worship essential, and he's demanding states across the country allow them to reopen this weekend.
The governors need to do the right thing and allow these very important, essential places of faith to open right now for this weekend. If they don't do it, I will override the governors.
It's Memorial Day weekend in the U.S., which marks the unofficial start of summer south of the border. Normally, millions of Americans travel for the holiday, but health officials are warning them to stay home and keep their distance. As Jennifer Johnson explains, there's concern the long weekend will cause an uptick in cases.
As Americans head out to celebrate this Memorial Day weekend,
after like 60-something days indoors, it's nice to soak up the sun.
Warnings from nervous state leaders.
We expect people to be getting out, going to parks, beaches, etc. But we have to remain vigilant at the same time.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo trying to avoid a new nightmare, emerging virus hotspots popping up in states that quickly reopened, like Texas, Florida, and Alabama.
The virus is not gone. The virus is still out there. This is a smart virus that spreads very easily from person to person.
Not every coastal town is welcoming holiday travelers, including parts of the normally packed Jersey Shore.
The most important months for this town, for our businesses, for the municipality are the months of July and August. And that's why it's so important that we get this right the first time.
The U.S. Travel Association predicts many Americans will stay home, spending $4.2 billion this Memorial Day weekend, a third of what was spent in 2019.
For the first time in 20 years, AAA is not releasing the Memorial Day travel forecast.
U.S. President Donald Trump is creating controversy with his own holiday travel plans, a visit Monday to Fort McHenry in Baltimore, the place that inspired the national anthem. The mayor has asked the president to reconsider, set an example, and not come to a city still under a stay-at-home order. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
CSIS and the FBI are warning about the growing threat of hackers targeting researchers working on COVID-19 treatments. Canada's spy agency doesn't point the finger at China, but the Federal Bureau does, accusing the communist government of trying to steal intellectual property. Today, the Prime Minister was asked what Canada is doing to protect COVID-19 research from theft by hostile states. Justin Trudeau also didn't mention China.
We have long been concerned about intellectual property protections in Canada. That's why we've increased the funding for the CSC, which is a communication security establishment that watches over cyber attacks and makes sure that our systems are safe.
Trudeau did say he's alarmed by China's move to impose a new national security law on Hong Kong. The proposed legislation could result in a crackdown on pro-democracy groups and reduce the territory's autonomy. There have been countless anti-government demonstrations in Hong Kong focused on the Chinese government's increasing control. More than 300,000 Canadians live in Hong Kong. And as Eric Sorensen reports, they, along with the rest of the world, are watching what happens next.
It is China's major political gathering of the year, and the National People's Congress has moved swiftly to propose a law to assert Beijing's security control over Hong Kong once and for all. Citing interference by foreign hostile forces, the Congress vice chair said powerful measures must be taken. The measures would give China's government the power to directly enforce security in Hong Kong. A small protest by pro-democracy activists took to the streets, and some lawmakers scuffled with security in Hong Kong's legislature. Under the British handover in 1997, a one-country, two-systems agreement ensured Hong Kong some autonomy till 2047.
Xi Jinping is burning Hong Kong.
Activists say Hong Kong's freedoms will be lost.
So they are announcing to the world that Hong Kong is no longer under one country, two system. It is now one country, one system.
Hong Kong's stock market fell more than 5% on Friday. Internationally, Canada's Prime Minister, who has sharpened his tone with China over 2 Canadians being held by Beijing, has now joined the UK and Australia expressing deep concerns over Hong Kong.
We have 300,000 Canadians who live in Hong Kong, and that's one of the reasons why we want to ensure that the one country, two systems approach continues for Hong Kong.
Justin Trudeau did not address possible sanctions. U.S. President Donald Trump suggested he's prepared to act if the laws change in Hong Kong.
If it happens, we'll address that issue very strongly.
Masks on all but the most senior officials are a sign of the extraordinary times for Beijing, facing global criticism over the coronavirus and now Hong Kong, but seems prepared to weather both.
It's a very unequivocal move that Beijing will no longer put up with the types of opposition that you've been seeing in Hong Kong, and that it is prepared to respond very decisively.
Activists are promising larger protests, but it's unclear whether Hong Kong's future will be one more dynamic, altered during the COVID-19 pandemic. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A catastrophic plane crash in Pakistan. Coming up, the neighborhood that turned into a disaster zone. Plus, a COVID-19 hotspot no more. How one Canadian city is defeating the virus. Captain Richard McDougall seemed to be in good spirits in his first public appearance since the crash involving a Snowbirds plane. McDougall, the pilot, is recovering in a BC hospital. On Sunday, he and his teammate, Captain Jen Casey, ejected from their Tudor jet. She did not survive. The military is now investigating. In Pakistan, a jetliner carrying 98 people crashed in a crowded neighborhood of Karachi. At least 80 people are dead. The plane was experiencing engine trouble trying to land. And as Crystal Goomansingh reports, the crash comes just days after domestic flights resumed.
Sirens, horns, and desperate voices echoed off the concrete where an Airbus A320 crashed moments after a distress call.
While proceeding back, sir, we have lost engines. Sir, Mayday, Pakistan 830.
It could have been any one of us. I take flights from Lahore to Karachi, Karachi to Islamabad. It could be any one of us on any given day. And I think to know that it could have been you, or it could have been somebody you know in that plane who doesn't come back home.
Yusra Askari captured images from the scene Friday afternoon. She's a local journalist and knew a few of the passengers on board. Domestic flights just resumed this week as lockdown restrictions were eased. Hospitals declared an emergency citywide, this system already struggling with COVID-19 patients. Officials warn it will take time to identify all of the victims, but there are a few survivors. This is said to be the president of the Bank of Punjab being rescued. Askari says somehow he ended up on top of a car. There was a family inside.
That moment is replayed in my head again and again. just how one person can be ever so lucky.
The Prime Minister has committed to an inquiry. Airbus says it will provide assistance with the investigation. The CEO of the national airline acknowledged the head pilot radioed that he had mechanical trouble. He called the crash an extremely heart-wrenching incident, one that has robbed people here of the joy of Eid, which marks the end of Ramadan. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Still ahead, a former neighbor of the Nova Scotia gunman says police ignored her warnings years ago. Global News has uncovered disturbing details about the man who killed 22 people last month in Nova Scotia. A former neighbor, Brenda Forbes, claims she moved away from Portapic after the gunman started stalking her, and she says she tried in vain to get authorities to investigate the killer's weapons and evidence that he was abusing his common-law partner. Ross Lord reports.
When a gunman murdered 22 people in Nova Scotia before police killed him, Brenda Forbes felt a different anguish than most.
I thought to myself, nobody listened to me. Everybody protected him.
Forbes says years earlier, she reported Gabriel Wortman's growing weapons collection and evidence he emotionally and physically abused his common-law partner.
She come over crying, saying that Gabriel was beating her up and wouldn't let her leave.
Forbes says in 2013, 3 men saw the gunman choking that same partner. One of the witnesses, the gunman's uncle, Glenn Wortman, has confirmed that assault to Global News.
And I called the RCMP. And I told them what happened.
She says she went to the gunman's uncle Glenn to see if he'd give a statement to police.
He said, no way, because Gabriel's already told me that he's killed somebody in the United States. He'll kill me if I say anything.
The Mounties have said they're investigating one American angle, how the gunman acquired some of his illegal weapons from the U.S. Asked if they're investigating any connection to possible murders there, a spokesperson says members are investigating every possible investigative avenue. But the RCMP says its files contain no record of any complaint from Forbes. She says she met with an RCMP investigator this week.
And he says, just to let you know, your story is totally believable.
Not good enough at the time, as the professional denturist acquired illegal weapons and decommissioned RCMP vehicles like the one police say he used to deceive unsuspecting victims before he killed them.
He had white privilege. He had power in that he had money. And we have to treat everyone equally and start looking at the behaviors of the person.
Advocates say the issue of male violence against women needs to be included in any public inquiry. They note RCMP statements that the killings started after the gunman assaulted and confined his partner, who escaped. Forbes says in recent weeks, people from the Portapic area have phoned her saying they're sorry for downplaying her courageous efforts. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
A community crushes the curve. Up next, the success story in Brooks, Alberta. Calgary and Brooks, Alberta have been given the green light to start easing restrictions. The two cities had experienced the highest levels of COVID-19 infections in the province. Today, Alberta's premier confirmed the number of cases is declining enough to allow both communities to open more businesses.
Hairstyling and barbershops will be permitted to reopen in Calgary and Brooks. Cafes, restaurants, and pubs and bars can also reopen for table service at 50% capacity this upcoming Monday. And on June 1st, day camps, including summer school, will be permitted with limits on occupancy in those communities.
The outbreak in Brooks was one of the largest in the country, more than 1,000 cases and 7 deaths. Most infections were connected to a meat processing plant. The premier says the outbreak is largely contained and 99% of infected employees have recovered. Heather Yerkes-West looks at the massive community response that helped the city get to this point.
Ramilyn B.I. is hoping to go back to work at the JBS meat packing plant in Brooks next week. She's been off for a month, taking leave at first because her son's daycare was closed. She had no idea she had also contracted COVID-19.
Actually, I don't have any idea when or where I got positive.
The virus began spreading through the small Alberta city in mid-April. There were outbreaks in multiple locations, including the meat packing plant. Dozens of new cases were being reported each day.
Because there's no cure, there's no treatment, there's no vaccine, clearly. So testing is really the only way to understand what's happening in your community with it. And so we pressed really hard for that first asymptomatic test site.
Beginning on April 27th, the testing event was held for anyone in Brooks, whether they had symptoms or not. 3,653 people were tested over 3 days. 10% of them were positive. BI was one of them.
So I went there in the 3 days. After that, they called me a day after that I got positive. No symptoms at all.
That kind of strikes you that 10% of your asymptomatic population is testing positive. I think it allowed everybody to understand, oh wait, there's a bigger problem here.
Part of that problem, Brooks is a community of many hardworking people from all over the world. Many have multiple jobs, living in crowded, multi-generational homes.
We actually decided to call and outreach to everyone in our database, and that's about 1,200 to 1,300 clients.
Mohammed Idris is a part of the community's COVID-19 Emergency Operations Center. He says cultural support played a vital role in curbing further spread. Educational material was translated into 13 languages, and people who were unable to isolate at home were put up in hotel rooms. By the first week of May, the curve started to flatten and people began to recover. A little more than 2 weeks after the outbreak's peak, less than 100 active cases remained. On May 12th, a second 3-day testing event was held. This time, 1,663 residents came out for testing, and less than 1% of them were positive.
I do think this is a success story. I always say that everybody owns public health. And so success on behalf of everybody.
BI's son was also tested for COVID-19. Fortunately, he was negative. BI is now considered recovered. The little family is looking forward to resuming some kind of normal after a chaotic few weeks. This mom, at least, won't soon forget. Heather Urix West, Global News, Brooks, Alberta.
And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, Your Canada is this group of foxes playing in Kingston, Ontario. We would love to see your corner of this country, so email your pictures to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here this weekend. Have a great night.